Saturday mornings at Riverside Country Club had a tradition, Dad's ritual humiliation of me, camouflaged as a round of golf. For 8 months, I'd found excuses not to attend. But today, he practically begged. "Just 9 holes, sweetheart," he said over breakfast. "Mr. Davidson keeps asking about you. I think some networking would do you good." Networking, right. Now it was 8:15 a.m. And I was standing on the first tee, wearing a fitted polo and shorts, blending into the manicured sameness of country club decorum. Dad was already lining up his shot, but I could feel it coming, the narrative he was about to spin. "Gentlemen," he called out as his group approached, "you remember my daughter, Sophia?" Mr. Davidson, with silver hair and a tailored swing, nodded in recognition. "Of course. How's the job hunt going, dear?" There it was, the question that had haunted Dad's Saturdays for months. "She's being thoughtful about her next steps," Dad replied before I could open my mouth, "looking for the right fit." The right fit. That's how Dad translated "my daughter isn't unemployed, she just hasn't told me she's running a quantum energy empire." Mr. Chin, slipping on his glove, gave a supportive nod. "Smart move. The market's tough right now. Nothing wrong with staying home until the timing's right." Staying home. I was 31 with a PhD, from MIT, but to these men, I was still the shy college kid who spilled cider on the buffet table one Christmas. Actually, I started to clarify, but Dad gently rested his hand on my shoulder. "She's been doing some consulting," he interjected, keeping doors open. Consulting, sure. That's one way to describe building a quantum energy company that just rewrote the future of power grid storage. Dr. Williams paused mid-swing. "If healthcare interests you, I've got pull at Presbyterian Hospital. Good salary, great track for advancement." "Kind of you," I said carefully, "but I'm focused on the energy sector." Mr. Davidson raised an eyebrow. "Energy? That's a tough industry, very specialized. Might want to consider starting lower on the ladder." Lower on the ladder. I held 17 patents in renewable energy systems. Last week, I inked the largest federal energy contract in U.S. history. But sure, start with the basics. "She's always had a passion for science," Dad added with a sigh. "We're just hoping she finds something stable." Stable, as if launching a company that's about to revolutionize the national grid was some teenage experiment I'd tire of. "The trick," Mr. Chin said as he lined up his swing, "is to be realistic. Young people these days all want to change the world. It's not always practical." Not always practical. Tell that to our current $4.2 billion valuation. Exactly, Dr. Williams chimed in. "Find stability, get some experience under your belt, explore the science stuff as a hobby later." A hobby. Last week, the president personally called to congratulate me, but sure, let's call it a side project. "Sophia understands," Dad said quickly. "She's just weighing her options." I knew why he was floundering. For months, he'd been dodging questions from his friends about why his MIT grad daughter was between jobs. He didn't know that yesterday, I closed a $2.8 billion federal contract. Because I hadn't told him. "Here's a thought," Mr. Davidson said, pulling out his phone. "Update your LinkedIn. I checked it after your father mentioned you. No headshot, no work history. Employers notice that." My LinkedIn, the one I kept intentionally quiet because every update triggered a flood of offers and interviews. "Thanks for the tip," I said, managing a smile. "You might also consider relocating," Dr. Williams offered. "Houston or Denver are where the real energy jobs are. Can't build a career from your laptop." From my laptop. In the $3.2 million warehouse I bought outright, yes, that's where the real work happened. "She's not at home," Dad said quickly. "She has her own place. It's modest." Modest. Dad's euphemism for doesn't live like a Fortune 500 executive. "Nothing wrong with modest," Dr. Williams said, "but eventually you want your lifestyle to match your ambition. Image is part of success." Image. Last week, I discussed national energy reform with the Secretary of Energy over steak tartare. But sure, let's talk optics. The biggest asset is connections. Mr. Davidson continued, slipping easily into mentorship mode. Success is all about who you know. Exactly, Dad added, clearly relieved. This is the kind of networking she needs. Mr. Chin walked over, smiling. My niece had a similar phase. Took her a couple of years to figure it out. Now she's doing great in marketing. It just takes patience. Patience. If only they knew how far I've already gone. I'd had plenty of patience, 3 years of it, while I operated in stealth, developing groundbreaking quantum storage technology as everyone around me assumed I was wasting my education. As we moved toward the second tee, Dr. Williams offered his wisdom with the air of someone bestowing rare insight. The key, he said, is not letting pride get in the way of practical opportunities. I've seen so many young folks turn down solid entry-level jobs because they think they're above them. Overqualified. 3 months ago, I'd been the keynote speaker at the International Energy Summit. But yes, maybe I was just being too picky. Sophia isn't like that, Dad replied, though his tone carried the uncertainty of someone hoping it was true. She's always been practical. Practical. Like investing $180 million of my own capital into RD before anyone else recognized that quantum storage was even commercially viable. You know what could help, Mr. Davidson said thoughtfully, is making some introductions. I know a few folks in energy, not senior positions, but good starting points. Starting points. He was offering me an entry into an industry where I was already becoming one of its most powerful figures. That's very kind, I said, and I meant it, even if the offer was completely unnecessary. We could arrange a few informational interviews, Dad said, his enthusiasm mounting. It would give Sophia a better sense of how the industry really works. How it works. I held more patents in renewable integration than anyone under 40. But sure, maybe a few informational interviews would help me get my bearings. By the 4th hole, we'd played far more career coaching than actual golf. And strangely, I felt a kind of pity for Dad. He had clearly been protecting his pride for months, spinning narratives to defend what he believed was my stalled trajectory, trying to keep up with his friends and their lawyer sons and finance daughters. What she really needs, Mr. Chin said as we waited for the group ahead, is a mentor, someone seasoned in business. Absolutely, Dad agreed, eager now. Sophia would benefit tremendously from that. A mentor. My board included a Nobel laureate, a former U.S. Energy Secretary, and the founder of Europe's largest renewable firm. But sure, maybe Mr. Chin had someone even better in mind. I'd be happy to help, Mr. Davidson offered. We could start with the basics, cover letters, interviews, that sort of thing. Cover letters. 2 months ago, I was on 60 Minutes discussing the future of global energy, but evidently, I could use some help with basic presentation skills. Dr. Williams chimed in. You've been pretty quiet, Sophia. In business, you need to learn to advocate for yourself. Quiet. I was quiet because I was navigating a surreal conversation in which 4 intelligent men were offering beginner-level advice to someone reshaping the world's energy infrastructure. She's always been reserved, Dad said, trying to explain. But yes, she could use some help putting herself out there. Self-promotion. Forbes had named me the most transformative energy entrepreneur of the decade. But sure, let's talk branding. At the 5th tee, Mr. Davidson pulled out his phone again. You know what? Let me call my friend Mark Thompson. He runs a renewable consulting firm, nothing huge, but solid footing for someone starting out. Starting out. He was about to recommend me for a position at a company that likely used technology my team had developed. That's really not necessary, I began. Nonsense, he said, waving me off. Mark's great with young professionals. Dr. Williams nodded. This could open real doors for you, Sophia. All it takes is one person believing in you. One person believing in me. Last week, the President of the United States called to congratulate me on securing a historic clean energy contract. But yes, this was sweet, too. Really, I appreciate it. But, Mark, hey, it's Bill, Davidson said, already mid-call. Listen, I've got someone amazing here, MIT Ph.D., very sharp. She'd be a great fit for that junior analyst role. Junior analyst. I was about to be handed an entry-level job in a market I was personally redefining. MIT. Yes, he continued. Energy sector. Just needs the right break. Then, as Mr. Chin adjusted his stance for his swing, he stopped mid-motion and turned toward me, frowning. Wait, he said slowly, what did you say your last name was? Morgan. Sophia Morgan. His eyes narrowed. Why do you look so familiar? Dad chuckled awkwardly. She gets that all the time. Must be one of those faces. But Mr. Chin wasn't convinced. He pulled out his phone and began typing. I watched him type, Sophia Morgan MIT Energy, and I waited. His thumb hovered, then stopped. He stared at the screen. Holy, he paled. Bill, hang up. What? Davidson looked confused. Still on the call. Hang up the phone, right now. The urgency in his voice cut through everything. Davidson quickly ended the call. Mark, I'll call you back. All eyes turned to Chin, who now held up his phone like it was radioactive. Gentlemen, he said quietly, we've made a significant mistake. What kind of mistake? Dr. Williams asked. Chin turned the screen toward them. It was yesterday's CNBC headline. Sophia Morgan, CEO of Quantum Dynamics Corp., $4. To be federal clean energy contract signed. Silence. Dad's face shifted from confusion, to disbelief, to something bordering on shock. Chin read aloud from the screen. CEO Sophia Morgan discusses breakthrough in quantum energy storage. $2. 8 billion US. Department of Energy deal finalized. Davidson lowered his phone slowly, stunned. You're the quantum storage CEO from the news. The one who cracked the grid problem, whispered Dr. Williams. The youngest ever to sign a federal contract of that scale, Chin added. They all turned to me. I nodded. That's me. Dad's golf club slipped from his hands, clattering to the tee box. But, your father said you were job hunting, Davidson stammered. I didn't say that, I said gently. Dad did. All eyes turned to my father, who looked like he was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in years. You said you worked in energy, he said slowly. You meant you own an energy company? I founded it, I said. Built it from scratch over the past 3 years. 3 years, Chin repeated, stunned. The same 3 years he's been telling us you were figuring things out. I was figuring things out, I said. I just happened to change the future of energy in the process. Dr. Williams scrolled furiously through his phone. Forbes 30 under 30. Time's most influential. Nobel nomination. The consulting work, Davidson murmured, turning to Dad. She was running a Fortune 500 company. Dad said nothing. The absurdity had finally caught up to them. They had spent an entire hour offering career advice to someone who had quietly transformed the energy industry. The entry-level positions we discussed, Mr. Chin said, shaking his head slowly. We were trying to help you break into an industry where you're apparently already one of the most influential people. And all that networking advice, Dr. Williams added with a faint laugh. We told you to meet people in energy. Davidson sighed. Meanwhile, she's probably on a first-name basis with half the cabinet. Dad was still staring at me, eyes wide, expression unreadable. Sophia, why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze gently, because every time I tried, you thought I was being unrealistic. Remember when I mentioned filing patents? You told me I was wasting money on pipe dreams. Dad's shoulders slumped a little. I remember. And when I told you I was opening a research facility, you asked if I could even afford the rent. Chin suddenly perked up, tapping at his phone. Wait, are you talking about that 50,000 square foot building downtown? The one no one could figure out who bought? That's the one. I bought it 2 years ago. Converted it into a quantum research lab. Chin's mouth fell open. You own the old semiconductor plant? Paid $18 million. In cash. The 3 men looked at one another, each expression silently recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Dad finally asked, voice hushed. Sophia, what's your company actually worth? As of yesterday's close? $4. 2 billion. But after the federal contract announcement, probably closer to 6. And your stake? 73%. There was a pause while the math sank in. So that makes you, Chin murmured, roughly $4.5 billion in personal net worth. Dad sat down on the nearest bench as if the realization had physically knocked the wind out of him. $4.5 billion, he repeated. It fluctuates, I said lightly, but that's the ballpark. The modest apartment I've been so concerned about, he murmured, is actually a converted warehouse I bought for $3.2 million. I like the industrial vibe. And the Honda? He asked, confused. You don't drive a Tesla or? I don't believe in flashy consumption. The Honda works. It gets me where I need to go. Dr. Williams blinked at his screen. It says here you're speaking at Davos? Next week. Actually, I'm on a panel about sustainable energy with the German Chancellor. And you were appointed to the President's Science Council? Took the position last month. Davidson looked like he'd swallowed his golf tee. I just tried to get you a $45,000 a year analyst job. It was a kind gesture. I told Mark Thompson you were brilliant and just needed a break. You meant well, I said sincerely. Chin exhaled. Your father's been apologizing for your career troubles for months, and all the while, you've been building one of the most transformative companies on the planet. We were feeling sorry for him, Williams said with a groan. Worried about the brilliant daughter who couldn't find her way, Davidson added. Dad looked up at me, eyes now filled with something between wonder and regret. Sophia, the worry I've been carrying. I know, Dad, I should have handled it differently, but I got tired of explaining what I was building to people who thought I was chasing fantasies. Chin shook his head. We told you to be realistic, to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar energy company. And to apply for junior analyst positions, Williams muttered. At firms that probably license her tech, Davidson added weakly. The absurdity finally caught up to them. It hung there in the silence, undeniable. When Mark asks why I hung up, Davidson said, rubbing his forehead, what do I tell him? You could say, I offered, that you realized the candidate you were recommending owns the patents his firm depends on. Dr. Williams burst into laughter, genuine, startled laughter. Bill, you tried to get the founder of Quantum Dynamics an entry-level job at a firm that literally pays her licensing fees. It's not funny, Davidson protested, but he was smiling too. It's a little funny, Chin admitted. We spent an hour giving beginner business advice to someone who's outpaced all of us combined. Dad shook his head slowly. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot, I said gently. You're a father who cared enough to worry. That's not foolish, that's love. But I've been making excuses for you, he said, to my friends, 4 months. Now you can tell them your daughter just signed the largest clean energy contract in U.S. history. The mood shifted. The tension finally cracked. What followed wasn't laughter. Exactly, but something warm and forgiving, just beneath the surface. The confidence tips we gave you, Williams said with a smirk. About speaking up? Actually good advice, I said. Even world leaders work on their delivery. But you've already spoken to everyone who matters. I have now, I admitted, but I remember starting out. And the advice you gave today? It would have helped back then. Davidson slid his phone back into his pocket. When we told you to work on your interview presence. I took mental notes, I said, smiling. No matter how successful you get, there's always something to learn. You were humoring us. I was listening. Success in one field doesn't mean you can't learn from others. All of you have built incredible careers. I respect that. Chin nodded slowly. That's probably why you've done what you have, because you still listen, even when the people advising you have no idea who you really are. Williams let out a quiet chuckle. We somehow turned a casual round of golf into the most surreal mentoring session in country club history. Dad looked at me. So, do we finish the round? I glanced at them, all 4 men who had come in thinking I was lost and now sat stunned by who I really was. I'd love to, I said, though maybe from here on out, we skip the employment talk. Deal, Dad said immediately, then added with a sheepish smile. But I reserve the right to ask questions about quantum energy storage, since, apparently my daughter is reshaping the grid and I was too focused on her rent to notice. That's fair. As we walked to the 6th tee, Mr. Davidson fell into step beside me. Sophia, he said softly, I hope you know everything we said this morning came from a place of care. I know, I said warmly, and I'm truly grateful. Even though the advice was completely off base? It wasn't wrong, it was just misdirected. But wanting to help someone succeed? That's never the wrong instinct. He smiled. Your father raised a very gracious daughter. He raised someone who believes successful people lift others up, even if they don't realize how high that person's already climbed. And with that, we finished the round. Not as a worried father and a floundering daughter, but as a family finally beginning to see one another clearly, for the very first time.